real estate in a repriced and kind of ever-changing world. We have an amazing group of panelists to talk about what the trends and opportunities are, both here in the region and around the globe. So we don't have a huge amount of time. I hope you can look up their bios online. But in the meantime, let's dive right in and talk about some of those trends and some of those opportunities. Yassine, maybe if I can start with you, seeing the growth in the region. You're obviously based in Egypt, but also doing work here in Abu Dhabi. Would love to hear your thoughts about some of the trends that you're seeing in real estate development and kind of where you all are most excited about kind of seeing that growth.
Okay. Actually, I'll start with Abu Dhabi. I think that Abu Dhabi or the Emirates in general is a place where a lot of people want to move in. I think there is a huge potential. We've seen since we've been here, honestly, all but very good things from government, from every aspect. We have actually a lot of pending demand that already, although we haven't yet launched, but a lot of people are approaching us on that. As far as Egypt is concerned, we still see a huge demand on real estate. At the end of the day, I believe real estate is the oldest business in the world. And it is probably the only business that will never be interrupted. People will always live. They'll always look for residence. People want entertainment in their lives. So I think the trend is very clear. In our part of the world, the problem is always inflation and the cost of construction. That's huge. And the only way to counter that, because you cannot really reduce prices and lose money, the only way you can counter that is by increasing the value of the brand. And this is where branding comes in play. We've been investing in our brand for the last 25 years or so. And accordingly, we can easily sell at a premium to our nearest competitor at around 20-25%. Reason being is the brand itself. And for the people, it is the cost, but also the brand and the value of the brand. So overall, I would say we're extremely competitive.
So you brought up an interesting point in terms of the brand valuations, and not just the valuations, but actually the value itself, kind of fundamentally. Ian, would love for you to talk a little bit about what you're seeing. There has been a lot of consolidation in certain parts of the real estate market, especially in hospitality. And there is a drive towards having more value in terms of the brands, but also individual properties and what that looks like across a portfolio. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about kind of what you're seeing as trends and what you're hopeful about in those trends.
The big brands are driven by, obviously, their share price, and their share price seems to be related to the growth in room numbers, and so they're all out going for growth. The products are becoming less and less differentiated. I don't know how many brands there are within Marriott, 30, 40. There are always new brands. Every time I look, there's a new brand that's been inserted because someone believes that there might be a niche. We're now seeing conversion brands with virtually no standards that you can just slip your hotel into. So what's happening potentially with that is that there'll be a dilution for owners, because the reason that you have brands is that you have loyalty schemes. And if those loyalty schemes are spread across more and more hotels, it's hard to create value. So I think the big hotel businesses, and we know what they are going to find it much more challenging to grow their supply. And I think that owners who are getting smarter will want more from hotel brands and will start to self-manage or actually use independent management companies.
And do you think, so what would be for those who are interested in kind of exploring more investment opportunities in the hospitality space, what should investors be looking for? As you just mentioned, one idea in terms of the independent management, but thinking about, kind of what are those levers for actual kind of value generation for you?
Are you talking about which market or which hotels?
Either, but yeah.
That's the thing. That's a pretty wide question. Yeah. I mean, obviously, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, you've got to be in stable environments where it's not going to be oversupplied, and you've got to look very carefully at what the demographics are, what the airlift is, where people are coming from, how sustainable is your labor force and legislation. So once you've decided where you want to be, you've got to really have a long think about what kind of management contract or franchise you sign. Because these are very long-term contracts, typically 20 years, almost impossible to get out of.
Right.
So you need to be very sure that you've got a brand that's going to deliver in the long term. And as I said, with more and more and more competition, less restrictions on what they can open nearby, your areas of protection are diminished significantly. And what you don't want is 5 other Hiltons or Marriotts opening within a couple of miles of you. So you need to be quite sure that that's going to be the case.
So I think we've heard a little bit thus far about some of the kind of costs pressure. You mentioned some of the levers that you need to see, like airlifts. Obviously, Sue, why don't you talk a little bit about some of what you're seeing in the Cayman Islands, in the Caribbean generally. Obviously, those are things that you look for as well, or need from either the government or private sector partners. So would love to hear kind of what you're seeing in trends, kind of across the region there in terms of hospitality, but also other sectors that are honestly also seeing a kind of more traditional investment coming in.
Yeah, I think the recurring theme has been a flight to safety and a flight to certainty. So in terms of safety, whether it's the developer or the consumer, everyone is looking for jurisdictions that have stable government, sound infrastructure, safe social environment, a good regulatory environment so that if you do enter into a dispute, the courts are going to function efficiently and fairly. Obviously, currency stability is important as well. But in addition to the safety, that long-term certainty to know that what's current today is not going to change tomorrow. And as Ian said, when you're entering into a contract, for instance, with a brand for 20 years, you're also entering oftentimes into a contract essentially with that jurisdiction.
Right.
Where you have to say, are you going to change the rules on me with regards to the Planning Act, with regards to taxation, with regards to immigration? Do you have the financial resources to continue to invest and reinvest in infrastructure that will allow airlift to come in, foreign workers, if you don't have a sufficient local population to help build? So, I think the days of saying this is a hot market, let's make a quick decision and go in and be a one-hit wonder, those days are gone. The diligence planning exercise and the importance of being there for the long term is important. I mean, we're a little bit of an outlier because our family office has been established in Cayman over 35 years now, and we very much are a believer that a rising tide raises all ships. So, we're in this for the long haul, but if I see one mistake that developers make going into new markets, it's not taking the time to research, understand, and make that long-term commitment.
Yassine, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that as well in terms of the intersection between the work that you do and the collaboration with the governments and the kind of the local communities as well. You mentioned, obviously, ensuring that there is kind of an ease of business, certainly here in the UAE, but would love to hear your thoughts about kind of how you navigate that.
As far as governments, okay, we've had that experience. We pioneered with the Egyptian government at one point. Real estate in Egypt, as far as land was concerned, was becoming extremely expensive. And it was hindering the capabilities of companies to grow. And we are a company that we don't do like, 200,000, 500,000 square meters of land. So we started with 2 agreements with the government. One was 2.1 million square meters. The other was a city of 12.6 million square meters of land. And the idea there was we do a JV with the government with escalating payments based on sales, because in Egypt we don't have mortgage, for example. And accordingly, you don't get your money when you deliver the units. We keep giving our clients up to 10 years worth of installments. So we act as a developer and as a bank. And the idea was we need the government assistance to grow your local developers. And we did that. Today, we have about 47 million square meters. We're about the size of 80% of the size of Manhattan as far as development. But to be finished, we will need probably till 2030 to finish that size. So this was a very, very good way of working with the government. They don't interfere at all because the agreement is the cash flow goes to an escrow agent and they simply divide the cash flows as far when it comes on whatever the contract said. So this has given us really a chance, us and other developers in Egypt, to grow. When we came here to Abu Dhabi, real estate is a business that is very difficult to export because there is a lot of know-how, there is a lot of regulation involved, and so we did a lot of studies. We know that definitely the Emirates is where a lot of people will be migrating to. We see a lot of, I lived in London for a while, a lot of people from England are moving out, and I think now the first destination is where we are right now. That's for a lot of European countries due to safety, due to high taxes, environments, and so forth. So we did a study, we visited with the government to understand the rules and regulations, and honestly, we felt extremely safe. And what we've been now working here for the last year. We have an office. Actually, one of my kids is sitting right there. He's moved here, and we feel very comfortable with the rules and regulations. There is a rule of law. There is what we felt with everybody working in the government, that they really want to help the private sector. They believe in the private sector. So we think it's been a good move.
No, that's great. And I think just we do want to pick up on the kind of demographic and kind of population demand, to your point about, kind of tax efficiency and where people want to live and how people want to live. But I just want to put a bookend on the government kind of collaboration piece. Ian, if you can talk a little bit about the work you all are doing in Panama at the Air Force Base, and would love to hear your thoughts about kind of some of what has been going well in terms of collaborating with the government there.
Yeah, I think that, as you've said, development is a long-term game, and you really need a stable, long-term environment. And when I went to look at Panama, I was unsure about that. We met with the government, and as part of the process of the privatization of the land that we did, the government created a specific agency with a new law for our agency. And what that's meant is that we have a bit like here, you have a fast track to planning consents. It's as of right, it's enshrined in law, and the agency is just to ensure that we comply with the law. So we don't need to go to central government if government changes. It's enshrined in code, and that's meant that there's no corruption, there's no extended delays, there's no changes that could render the project useless or non-profitable. So we've had a really, really stable environment, and that's been great. The country's got a good rule of law. It's a dollar economy, and a bit like this is a hub for the whole region, Panama is a hub for Latin America. All around it, Latin America's unstable. And people who wanted to move to safe havens have either moved to Panama or, if they've got a bit more money, the US. So it's growing well, it's a good safe haven, and it's been a great place to do business.
Yep. No, I think very important kind of lessons learned there in terms of what investors or other developers could be looking for in terms of partnership with the government. But want to go to what we've heard a few times now in terms of the shift and kind of the global migration that we're seeing and demand kind of change. not only for residential, but also commercial. And so, Sue, would love to hear your thoughts about kind of what you're seeing. Obviously, more and more folks can be remote working. What does that mean in terms of, commercial opportunities on the islands? Would love to hear your thoughts about kind of what you're seeing, not just in the demand shift, but in terms of where, but also how they want to be working or where they want to be living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, there was a steady, quiet growth in global mobility where people, again, started to look for those safe havens from 2010 to 2020. And then, of course, 2020 hit. And it really changed how we looked at where and how we work, as we all know. And Cayman was a little bit of an anomaly because a lot of people own property there, but what they didn't realize was that you needed residency to transcend borders. And, that really changed the dynamic. And of course, during that time when people started acquiring residency in other jurisdictions, they realized that there was a tax implication for that if they started extending their time, whether they wrote out COVID, say, in Mexico or the UAE or in Cayman. And that prompted the need to say, we really need to prove economic substance. That having that mind and matter in a jurisdiction is now mandatory for us to manage our global taxation, either on a corporate or personal or both. So we've seen a tremendous increase in demand for physical office space that is actually occupied by individuals on a full-time basis now in Cayman. To put in perspective, we're a jurisdiction of 80,000 people. Our main island is 22 miles long. And we're on track right now with our current projects to be at 1.6 million square feet of Class A commercial office space, which is fairly significant for a jurisdiction of our size. Our cost per square foot is quite competitive to our nearest neighbor, the United States. So we're ballpark $55 per square foot, when you see Miami prices now hovering around $65. So you're starting to see a lot of companies saying, look, we can now put people anywhere, and people are willing to move. So why not go to a jurisdiction where they can get that life-work balance, where office space is affordable, where we need economic substance to take advantage of certain taxation policies, and where we, quite frankly, can diversify our risk, because very few people want their intellectual capital all in one jurisdiction anymore. So we're quite optimistic on the growth for that. And I think, again, you're seeing it here in the UAE, wherever there's that safety, that quality of life, and affordability of both office and residential combined. That's where the hot markets are going to be, and we're in one of them.
And so, Yassine, would love to also hear your thoughts as you're developing areas, roughly the size of Manhattan, what that looks like for you in terms of trends you're seeing. Is that shifting what you're building and how you're building? We're seeing a lot more in the mixed-use space. We're seeing more as we all get older, intergenerational housing, kind of looking more and more at kind of mixed income housing opportunities. So would love to hear your thoughts about kind of what you're seeing in the trends there in what you're actually building.
When you go to that size, building cities, it's not about resi only. It's about resi, commercial. It's about sporting clubs, activities, amenities, schools, universities, and so forth. And we have different verticals that we do. One of which is tourism in general. We have in Egypt 1,300 rooms so far. Our plan is to go to 3,000 rooms within the coming 5 years, hopefully. So that's one of the verticals. The other is education. We have 2 schools. We're building another 3 schools over the coming maybe 3-4 years in Egypt. We have a university in one of our developments. Plus, we're the major shareholder in the largest platform for universities in Egypt, with a capacity of roughly 45,000 students. Wow. So people they don't want to commute a lot. Where they live, they want to have all the amenities. They want to have the outlets, the entertainment, the nightlife, the schooling for the kids, the hospitals, everything. And, it makes a lot of sense even when you do these type of developments, your return or your yield on commercial, for example, be it office or retail or so forth, is much higher than if you're outside of these cities, because people, they don't want to really commute. They want to go home, relax, go to the nearest place. They want their offices next to their places where they live.
Exactly. We were talking about this earlier with London in terms of, kind of the challenge of just the demand for being in the kind of greater London area, but having that be, kind of farther and farther out. So would love to hear kind of how you all are thinking about that tension between, having the kind of consumer want to be as close as possible to, kind of working and living versus what the reality is of the actual infrastructure and real estate that you can build.
I think the one thing that the UK has done quite well, and particularly in London, is to create a good public transport system. We have a very efficient subway or tube lines. We have buses, we have walking, we have cycleways, and that's really connected the city. And what it's done is to actually make some of the outer-lying districts much more accessible now. And so that's evened up and it's reduced the pricing pressure on the core areas. So you can now live a bit further out and commute easily. And one of the key drivers when we look at commercial real estate is what is the drive time to the office? How can people easily get to work? What's their quality of life? You want to be able to live, work, and play nearby. And I think that's something that in a lot of cities hasn't really been thought through.
Right.
They've developed in a haphazard way, and I think that's one of the great benefits of a market like this in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. They're really thinking 20 years out. They're thinking about infrastructure. They're thinking about the airport and airlift. They're thinking about rail. They're thinking about vertical travel. All of these things, which in Europe we're actually years behind.
So moving away a little bit from the kind of residential and traditional commercial, the previous panel was talking about tokenization. It's hard to not go to a conference at this point and talk about AI, which leads to a conversation about data centers and investing in the kind of infrastructure and kind of needs, technology needs that we all increasingly have, but we don't necessarily know what we're going to need 20 or 30 years out. Ian, to your point, would love to hear from anyone on the panel about kind of what you're seeing as an opportunity or potentially a challenge when you're looking at investing in opportunities like data centers.
We haven't actually invested in them. Maybe we should have done earlier, but it's easy to say in hindsight. I think, look, everybody knows that data is doubling and doubling, and we need huge amounts of capacity for AI. But the worrying thing is that debt issuance for data centers last year was 20 billion, and this year it's 120 billion. And so it's very hard to know what's a good project and what's not, what makes money. We don't know what the life expectancy of a data center is. We don't know how technology is going to change. We don't know whether you've got to write it off over 5, 10, or 15, or 20 years. We've got no idea. This is still slightly the Wild West. And yes, it's fine if you're Microsoft building a data center because you know and you're the end user. But if you're an independent developer, potentially it's a dangerous place to be if you don't really understand it. We saw a deal recently in the US for a massive data center with a 30 billion cost, 27 billion of which was funded by debt. And I don't know what you all think, but where I'm sitting, 10% equity in a volatile business like data looks to me to be dangerous.
Right. Sue, do you agree? Yeah, other thoughts?
No, I just, for us, our physical infrastructure in Cayman would not even lend itself to looking, or any of the other British overseas territories that we look at. But I think if you just even look at, the era of massive wind turbines, solar farms, there's going to be a lot of that NIMBY, not in my backyard sentiment as well. And, if governments aren't going to be there to support it, as Ian said, even if you start looking at public-private partnership models on that, I don't know that the appetite is going to be there for a lot of traditional developers that have, historically allocated mostly to hospitality, resi, or commercial.
Yeah, I think we already see the NIMBYism challenge, and that goes to, I think, some of the lingering risks that would love to kind of dive into with you all, one of which is environmental. So since we've been talking about the Cayman Islands and the Caribbean in general, at this point, most communities face some type of environmental risk, whether that is a storm, whether that's kind of daily tidal inundation, whether that is fires, kind of drought, et cetera. And so regardless of where you are, you most likely have some type of risk that has probably not been priced in to your overall valuation. However, more and more we are seeing the insurance industry pull out of communities and pull out of, in the case of the United States, certain states altogether. And so when you are uninsurable, you are most likely uninvestable. So would love to hear how each of you are handling things like environmental risks, whether that's partnering with government agencies, whether that's partnering with insurance companies to enable capital to flow while still protecting your assets. Sue, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think one thing that you said immediately is insurance, right? And Cayman is now the captive insurance capital of the world. That is not a coincidence. There's not a week, I would say, that, a fellow friend from a family office somewhere else in the world is calling up saying, hey, I'm going to be on the island to set up my own captive. Can we get together while we're here? And captives are one of the best solutions right now for managing your own risk and reducing cost. But I think, again, it's really taking a look at where you're building and doing the research as well in advance. It's understanding historical weather patterns. It's understanding where flood's going. We invest heavily in weather study reports before we do anything. It's looking at the LEED certification or similar models for your construction, which we're doing, which again reduces our risks. We were the first LEED certified developer in the jurisdiction, and we've adopted that throughout. And it's really helping to support government in terms of what they're doing with the infrastructure, or quite frankly, becoming more self-reliant. Whether that's your own energy microsystems, your own water treatment plants, your own self-regulated servers and internet. We have a master planned 685-acre community called Camana Bay, and we have our own internet service there. And all of our buildings are hurricane resistant. Why? Because we're the landlord to a significant number of banks and funds that are what help keep the global economy going, which you don't really appreciate when you first go there. So I think everything is self-reliance, self-sufficiency, risk mitigation, understanding the land you're building on. Again, it's not a 6-month study, it's a several-year process. And then really taking a look at captives right now. And adopting global standards. Like we follow Miami-Dade as our building guideline. And I think, that standard's going to continue to change, and you have to keep up and adhere to that with all your development process.
I think what's great about what you just said is the kind of community level infrastructure. What you're talking about is kind of being self-sufficient at that level of the entire neighborhood or the entire community, which is important, right? Because even if your individual asset is protected, if your neighbor is not, there's a good chance that your valuations are going to be affected either way, right? Ian, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think the one thing people don't think a lot about in infrastructure are your people. And, if you don't have people with the right qualifications and expertise in your community on your team, everything's okay until it's not, and there's a problem. And I think one thing that differentiates us is we invest a lot in our people. Not just, the academic skills, but to make sure we have people that are resourceful and can solve problems when they come up. And, so often we focus on the bricks and mortar, but we don't always remember the importance of the intellectual capital as part of your infrastructure planning and development. And that's a very important priority for us.
Yeah. It's true of your team, but also your tenants, right? The people who are living there or working there, right, is part of that overall value, which is important. Ian, would love to hear your thoughts of how you all have been looking kind of across the portfolio at any other kind of environmental risks that were surprising to you, or kind of challenges that you didn't necessarily, kind of see down the road but had to deal with.
I think the insurance thing is a massive issue, and you need to be sure that you've got a building which is ideally best in class, so that if insurance does get sticky, you're going to be able to insure even if others can't. But to your point, if the rest of the infrastructure is down, if your power is down, if the airport's down, if roads are flooded, it doesn't really help you. Right. So I think you've got to be sure that the whole area, the whole infrastructure, is resilient. I think that's a really important thing. And then there's local issues. We've had over the years, you look at returns in the Caribbean, and they need to be higher. And the reason is you have weather issues, you have illness. We got Zika, we've had dengue, we've had COVID, we've had beach erosion, we've had storms. You start to layer in these risks, and you've got to be really pricing it appropriately. I think perhaps sometimes we didn't in the past. In Cayman we had an issue with the beach, and it's taken us several years to get the government to even approve our scheme, let alone pay for it, which we're going to do in the end. So it's an ongoing, slow process. You've got to really think about the risks wherever you're developing. And I used the Caribbean as an example, but it's true anywhere in the world. Nowhere is risk-free.
Right.
The risk can be infrastructure, it can be human capital, it can be airlift, it can be wars, civil strife. Whoever thought that in Paris, a bunch of guys with yellow gilets jaunes would actually stop the traffic and disrupt the city for so long?
Right.
You have to really think about this. It's not a short-term, quick in and out sort of thing. You have to really be long-term.
And if you're not thinking about it, your insurer is, right? The insurance companies definitely think about it and will price you accordingly, not just because of your, specific infrastructure or your assets, but because of the kind of community infrastructure. Yassine, would love to hear your thoughts.
Actually, I'm extremely lucky in Egypt. We don't have much. But what we have sometimes is floods. And as a developer, you're between two things. Do you make your infrastructure on these floods that happens once a year, once every 2 years or 3 years, or not? And the alternatives are, it's going to be very costly to do an infrastructure ready to take floods that happen once every year or so, or you don't. And we came up with a specific design on that, which is like swales. It's more of a landscaping feature, but that can take, in case of floods happening, it would take the water on the typology of the land and put it in areas that appear like water features in the development, not to invest so much on the infrastructure of the city.
Right. But you need everything, as you just said, is important. To focus on it all also costs money to make those investments. So would love to hear from the panelists what is the kind of biggest financial risk that is keeping you up at night right now, and how we might be able to kind of brainstorm ways that this community in particular could potentially help to alleviate some of that. Ian, you mentioned kind of the debt burden and some of the challenges in terms of the overall kind of capital structure and the financing. Would love to hear kind of where you're seeing some of the biggest kind of financial risk in the industry.
I don't think up till now we've had, in the last couple of years, any great conviction as to where we should invest or what we should invest, but we're beginning to see the cracks post-COVID again. I think people underwrote. huge growth post-COVID, and it happened for a while. Maybe it was a bubble. The growth's flattened off. Inflation hasn't fallen. So you've got wage inflation, utilities costs, food costs, all these things. So hospitality industry, the margins are under pressure. The top line in many places is falling. I'll give you an example. In America, since they cut back on government spending, a lot of groups and associations have lost federal funding. So the top line is more difficult, costs are rising, and we're going to see some distress starting next year. We haven't really seen distress in the last few years. People extended their loans, people sat and waited, they hoped they would be all right. They cut their capex, they didn't look after the assets, and now suddenly that's coming home to roost. And so we see some fairly significant movement next year, I think. And you'll start to see it in the US because it's the most efficient market, and it'll spread to other places. I'm not seeing a collapse at all, but there will be certain situations which are over-leveraged and distressed, and I think one needs to be ready to look at that.
And potential opportunity we see in the U.S., distressed assets in areas like senior housing, in some of the retail space, and seeing kind of the redevelopment possibility there. Obviously, there's a challenge for the original asset owner, but certainly there's also opportunities. Sue, would love to hear kind of your thoughts about where you're seeing kind of any sort of challenges. We talked about cost, but we talked about demand as well. Would love to kind of hear any thoughts you have in terms of other kind of risks in the market that you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the lowest risk segment right now is luxury and high-end commercial. They've proven to be the most resilient and the most profitable in upturns, and again, resilient in downturn. Where I think the biggest risk is going to be is that lower to mid-market and the compression on what is the highest and best use of land in markets. Again, is it going to be a data center? Is it going to be affordable housing that's proximate to where most work is taking place? Because governments are starting to say we're going to restrict zoning, for instance, to only affordable housing here, because if we don't have affordable housing, we're going to have to invest in infrastructure to get our workers, so it's a trade-off. I think there's a really good opportunity that you're not seeing a lot of discussion on is converting properties, historically, like low to mid-market hotels into affordable housing, because they historically occupied some of the best real estate in urban centers. And you're starting to see people that are really moving into retrofits on those properties. Mm-hmm. The challenge, though, is they don't necessarily have the interest from either the private equity markets or the lenders, because they just don't understand it. So the question will be who's going to put the capital into some of that movement. But again, the biggest risk really is the compression that we're in right now of rising costs and almost everything. As Ian said, labor, tariffs, cost of materials, insurance. And then you have a decline in consumer confidence, largely. People are worried about tax policy. They're worried about economic slowdown. They're worried about political volatility that will change their employment status. So, we're already starting to see that softening in the mid-market. But our luxury, again, is performing. So the question is, where does the crack come first? Is it going to be on the cost side, or is it going to be in consumer sentiment starting to rebound to the levels that it did immediately post-COVID?
Right. And I think the demand piece of it that you mentioned in terms of, why would you retrofit, for a kind of mid-level hotel? Well, there is demand, actually. I live in New York City. There is demand, actually, for apartments that are potentially smaller, but they are more affordable. And so I do think that you'll see kind of more investment interest once that demand is really forecasted in a way that makes sense. Yassine, would love to hear kind of your thoughts of any sort of other lingering risks that you're seeing in the market.
Being part of the Middle East, it's in Egypt specifically, it's the foreign exchange risk. We've had many runs of high inflation, high devaluation. So I think this is the the biggest risk that we have. Other than that, of course, is the risk on normal, employees, people leaving, especially to other Gulf countries. We've seen that recently. And building materials could be also a challenge because of, if Gaza reconstruction happens, most likely all of the building materials will be coming from Egypt due to proximity. So I think that's another challenge. How do we try to mitigate these risks? We mitigate it by reducing the size of the areas that we sell. So we sell, whenever any project we do, we always try to keep 10 to 15% of the project to be sold after the project is finished, just to mitigate any risk on devaluation that could happen, on cost increases, so forth. We do early on procurement in a lot of cases, especially all the items that are FX related, dollar related, like, I don't know, escalators, elevators, HVAC systems, stuff like that. So we try to procure that early on just to secure the development itself. And again, by leaving a part of the development till the project is finished, what helps us is trying to increase the recurring income from hotels, from malls, from retail, office space, from the different unis, for example, education, with high EBITDA multiples. So I think that's the biggest risk we have. The biggest risk, again, is, an increase in cost due to devaluation or due to pressures coming in from, like, as I said, Gaza reconstruction or the Gulf. There's a lot of growth in the Gulf, and they use a lot of local Egyptian, especially engineers and so forth.
So we have just a few minutes left. We're standing in between lunch and would love to send these folks off with some opportunities that you see. So very quickly, rapid fire. Yassine, you started the panel talking about how real estate obviously is one of the oldest industries that we have. We all need places to live and to work. Would love to hear kind of the biggest opportunity you see for this upcoming year.
I think the biggest opportunity is the Middle East in general. I think with no offense to the European people, but I think that's the new Europe. I think a lot of people will be migrating here due to getting, like, for example, here, even in Qatar, in other places within the region, a very, very pleasant, very good tax regime. The quality of life is extremely high. And, I lived in London for a while, and the family did, and due to the new tax laws, everybody just migrated, everybody's leaving. So I think this area is the area to go.
Ian, you're holding out, right? You haven't left yet. Have you left? Have you moved from London?
Yeah.
Yeah,
live
okay.
in Monaco. I never thought I would, but I think it's a combination of really some crazy levels of taxation, together with some safety issues and other things. And I just don't really, for the moment, want to be there. I wouldn't bet against London, because in the end, London is a great international city. It will come back. There will be a change of government. There will be a relaxation of some of these punitive tax codes. So I think London's got good infrastructure. It's got good talent and people. Where would I look at investing in the next couple of years? I think in terms of development, the UAE, absolutely. I think they've got a long-term plan. They're pro-business. They want you to invest here. I think it's a fantastically fertile environment with great demand. I think that if you want to look, I think distress will happen next year. So I'd be looking for areas that you really understand, where you can pounce quickly and buy things distressed.
Amazing. Sue?
Echoing what Ian said, any jurisdiction that has a long-term plan, tax efficiency and stability is a prime market. And I think it comes back to real estate fundamentals. Everything comes down to supply and demand. Ask people what they want and just give it to them. And, the opportunity is where you do the research, understand the market, and supply that product. And we know that what people are looking for right now is stability, that life-work balance. People just want easy. It's been a long, hard time. Like real estate's getting too hard to own, too hard to, try to navigate your lifestyle relative to your office space and your residential. And I think as a community, we all have opportunities to do that both privately and through public-private partnerships that address that compression that's currently happening in the market.
Amazing. Well, please join me in thanking... Oh, yes, Ian.
I've got one last point.
All right. One big opportunity.
In the world of AI, you can't replicate experiences, and that's travel.
Amen. Well, so please join me in thanking this amazing panel for all of these fantastic opportunities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.